Now, Romans is written by the Apostle Paul, and Paul was a Jew, and he had a real heart to reach out to those who weren't Jews, who are called the Gentiles. And at the time that Paul's writing, there's this massive thing that's going on, which is the church was wrestling with what exactly the good news of Jesus Christ meant. And the plan of salvation, as revealed in the Bible, is that God comes first of all to the people of Israel. So that's why the whole of the Old Testament is about the chosen people of Israel. And they're God's people, and they are really meant to be a blessing to the nations around them. But they fail in that over and over and over again. And so eventually, in the New Testament, God comes himself as a person of Israel, as Jesus the Jew, and he through his actions becomes a blessing for the whole world. Through Jesus, salvation and the option to become part of the chosen people of God is thrown wide to everybody. But in the aftermath of that, and as the church began to share this message, of course they would come across a lot of opposition, not least from the Jews who didn't like what was being said. And so in Romans, what Paul is doing is he's addressing that particular issue in the passage that we're reading today. So he starts off by saying, look, you think that he's talking to the Jews, who follow the law, are a light to everybody else and a guide to the blind people. And then he accuses them, first of all, of hypocrisy. He says, actually, don't you realize that you're breaking the law in so many areas? So you'd say to people you're not meant to have an affair, but then you yourself are having affairs. You tell people you're not meant to worship idols, and then you yourself are guilty of doing that. And first of all, he says you're not even following the law. And then he goes on and says, you think it's just about outward actions. So being circumcised, obviously, is a physical outward action, but he says it's not about that. It's about the state of the heart, which is the circumcision of the heart, as it were, in your spirit being set apart before God to really, really follow him. So he's criticizing the notion that through the outward appearance and through going through certain rituals, you'll be right before God. What he's saying is, no, you're only right before God when your heart is right before him. And this is the part of the challenge of the gospel. It gets beyond any notion of, if we fulfill a certain set of criteria, tick a certain number of boxes and behave in a particular way, then we're going to amble our way into heaven. God examines and he looks at the heart. And on the one hand, I find that wonderful and refreshing, because God isn't going to be fooled by any of us putting on a good front. And at the same time, I find it a little bit scary, because I know what goes on in my heart, and it's not very good half the time. And then Paul's going to go on in the next little while and explain the amazing message of the gospel, which is Jesus comes for those of us who are sinners in our hearts, and he can transform us from the inside out. So watch this space.